One, one, two, three. All right, Ilya, it's great to see you again. It's been a while since we've had a chance to talk. So and frankly,
yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame that it took so long. Right.
But what a week. What a time for us to catch back up, because a lot is going on. I'm almost not sure where to start. So I want to start this by saying we will do a catch up and a recap on what's happening with the Congress, but there's so many other current events that I think we have to hit on. Obviously, starting with the UK sending the Storm Shadow missiles. Did you see this coming? And what impact do you think that they will have?
No, both US and UK were promising this for a very long time, and I think that everybody just got sick and tired waiting for the US to deliver on the promise. That's why the British, they decided to move ahead just by themselves. But I really think that it may have a difference at the battlefield. Yes, the main idea is that Russia has adapted already to HIMARSes. They are boasting that their anti-missile defenses and their electronic warfare, that they both now know how to fight HIMARSes, which people are pretty skeptical about those claims. But nevertheless, what is the 100% reality is that they moved all their stockpiles, even like tactical stockpiles of conventional arms away from the front lines, and it's harder to get them. So the only method for Ukrainian army right now to attack Russia's supplies is with the different acts of sabotage and groups which are working behind the lines, and that's obviously is not as efficient and as convenient as HIMARSes. That's why having longer range missiles, it would allow to disrupt the delivery of shells, artillery shells, and fuel to the front lines, and would significantly disrupt the efficiency of the military campaign on the Russian side.
Do you think that the UK doing this now makes it easier or necessary for the US to follow through and do the same thing?
Well, so far, we already saw similar things with the tanks, for example.
Right.
When Chancellor Scholz said, "Oh, we will deliver Leopards only in case of Americans would agree to deliver Abramses," and Americans didn't want to deliver Abramses. But when they realized that Europeans are ready to deliver tanks, then they said, "Okay, we will also deliver Abramses." At some point later in future, doesn't matter, that allowed Europeans to deliver. So I think that, yeah, what United States is very much afraid of is they afraid to be the first to take the initiative in this regard, because it's the paramount importance for the American policymakers to behave like United States is not leading the war. It's just helping Ukraine, assisting Ukraine in what they do by themselves. And so if Ukraine has this capacity already, you can never tell, what missiles were actually used. And
right.
In this situation, it would be hard to blame Washington.
So this obviously was the week of the anniversary of May 9th. Anyone who was paying attention saw you all over CNN that day. Is there anything you want to say to us about what happened in Moscow and across Russia versus in previous years, and what we might take away from those celebrations this year versus years of the past?
Obviously, everybody saw the great military parade.
Yes.
on the Red Square. Just a year ago, there was, tons of military equipment, and it was the mighty army, the second largest in the world.
Yes.
This year it was a pitiful tank T-34, which was the main battle tank during World War II, but it stopped producing in 1946.
And produced in Ukraine, I understand.
Yeah, it was produced everywhere. It was produced in Ukraine, not only in Ukraine, but it was produced in Ukraine, in Kharkiv, but also in other locations in the Soviet Union. But yeah, in reality, you know, it was produced everywhere, but it was designed in Ukraine. It was designed in Kharkiv because the guy who was the creator of this tank was from Kharkiv. It was invented there, and it was the best Soviet tank in general. Was the best tank in the world at that time, like Kalashnikov of tanks. But that was the only piece, the only piece, and non-war present, but this tank. But the meaning of this was not that Russia has no tanks anymore. Obviously, it does, unfortunately, and yeah, they're at the battlefield, but not only at the battlefield. But the reason for this was different. The reason was that Putin was just afraid to sit on the Red Square. He needed to make the parade as short as possible. And he even invited leaders of other Central Asian states to be like his hostages, his shield, in case Russian partisans would do another drone attack that, like what happened on May 3rd. And also another reason for this very, very small parade was that it was very actively discussed here in Ukraine that maybe we just deliver some anti-tank equipment also to Russian partisans, and that they may attack the regiments that would be approaching Moscow to take part in the parade. And in this case, they were a very easy target. And obviously, they would not give something like javelins because of Americans, again, who explicitly prohibited to use any of its equipment inside Russia. But NLAWs, which are British, could be used, and they have long range enough so that you could fire and just disappear. Yes. And then the whole thing would be disrupted, and it would be a humiliation. Even for the world, it doesn't matter, but it would be a humiliation in the eyes of Russians. And it would be even worse than to cancel the parade altogether.
Or have one tank.
No.
Well, and you said something interesting I hadn't thought about. I obviously saw the photos of Putin with the other leaders from the Eastern European nations sitting next to him, around him. I hadn't thought about he was basically using them as like hostages, as exactly. Protecting himself.
No, that's exactly the case, and it's not a speculation because they were not invited before May 3rd. Actually, the whole idea Kremlin got somewhere around May 5th when they started sending the invitation, a surprise invitation, and all those leaders, they were not present at the previous military parade. Yeah. 1 year ago. And even Lukashenko, who is always invited, he was reluctant to come. And he was the last, by the way, to take the invitation. Because they were simply afraid, and Lukashenko understood it clearly that if it would be just two of them, Putin and Lukashenko, that would increase chances for an attack, not decrease it. And right now, the main thing that I'm thinking about in this regard is how much did it cost to Putin to actually have those guys? What did he promise to them? Because I think that because of the physical danger, it shouldn't be some concessions to their states. It should be some personal motivation. Yes, and they should be pretty expensive.
Yeah, Yeah. So in all of this conversation, there's something interesting you said on Twitter a few hours ago about partisans inside of Russia, and I don't want to read the whole tweet. It's go and see it. You know, if you're watching, go and see it. But you talked about how being a partisan and taking action against the Russian state is almost becoming fashionable or stylish, and that the punishment is actually equal to saying something bad on the internet. So if you're going to be punished the same either way, why not blow something up instead of just making a bad tweet? So talk about what's happening there with the partisan movement and how it's growing and the impact.
Yeah, I think that we actually passed through a certain mental barrier. And it's not only in the minds of ordinary people, but which is more important, it's in the minds of the elites, decision makers, and the media. Because I would even say, like in April, it was a kind of a big no. No violent protests, no violent resistance. Some peaceful actions and whatever. But in the war, you cannot win the war without firing at your enemy. You know, it's simply impossible. And making Ukrainians do the war for you, it's immoral, and that's my main debate with the other members of the Russian opposition. Who kind of pretend that they would sit through the war doing nothing, and they will return to Russia and take over the remnants of this fallen regime, and would carry on from there. I think it's totally immoral, and people who are taking this position, they just do not deserve to be at power. But I think that media, who were very supportive of this position, they started to change, and the main world media are right now putting out articles about what's going on. They started to believe that it's real, because also Russian liberal journalists, they were trying to disseminate the fake information that there are no real partisans, it's all Ukrainians, that it's their special operations, and that they just want to disguise themselves under the face of Russian partisans, but this movement is non-existent. And also I see the panic that starts to spread inside the Russian elites. They also started to believe that it's all real. And there was this first attack on Dugin's family, but then there was another propaganda guy, Kodakorski, in April, and then Zakhar Prilepin, also a top propaganda person in Russia, and one of the leaders of one of pro-Kremlin political parties, which happened just several days ago. And now they kind of everybody believes it, and they are scared. It's a hysteria there. It's a full paranoia. They are discussing who is next, and they are telling that the regime is not able to protect them. And I think that soon this panic would be spread onto the government officials as well.
So we're having this conversation on May 11th. This is not the conversations that Mr. Putin would want us to be having 2 days after May 9th. He would have wanted, in a beautiful, perfect world for him, he'd want us to be talking about how he's to be feared and he's in control, and you know that Russia is sure to be the victors here. And there's another player in this in the last week or two, well, for a long time, but more prominent in the last week or two, and that's Mr. Prigozhin. You want to talk about what's going on there with him?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. First of all, I want to say that I personally don't like to call expected Ukrainians offensive counteroffensive, because it's really an offensive. Yes. To recapture its land, but it's military-wise, it's an offensive. But yes, what's happening right now, there is a counteroffensive in Bakhmut. and the Russian regiments are retreating. The front, I believe, is about to collapse. And Prigozhin went ballistic about all this. He's complaining that he's not given enough supplies, which is not true, by the way. He was always treated preferentially, and not the other way around. So he's complaining about everything, and I believe yesterday or day before yesterday, day before yesterday, it was on May, on 9th of May, he made a public statement about the crazy old guy who is not capable of leading.
The grandpa. I think he called him Putin a grandpa.
Yeah, grandpa. He was calling him a grandpa, yes. And now he's explaining that he meant some generals, but everybody's take is that he was talking about Putin himself.
Yes.
And moreover, Prigozhin today has published a sociological poll, which was conducted by his own structures, and it was published on his resources. So it's no like special operation against him, where he says that the popular support for Putin is like 50%, and popular support for Prigozhin is 30%, and the third guy is Mishustin, the prime minister, which is at 15%, and all the rest are below 1%. So that's, you know, a very bold statement, because he is kind of positioning himself as the alternative to Mr. Putin himself. Why I think he's doing all this? I think that he wants to be kicked out. I think that he wants to be sent away from the front line, to be able to say later that he was about to win, but he was not allowed to. So to save his face. And he has a strong rationale for this, because his structure, this whole private military company Wagner, it started in Africa, and it started to conduct operations there in Africa. And I think that what he is willing to do is to return back to Africa, where in Sudan there are certain political developments which are very promising in terms of a contract for the private military group that he has. It's significantly downsized, but nonetheless, he is capable to land this contract in his pocket, and by staying in Donbass, he is losing a great opportunity, and moreover, you know, his regiment is about to vanish.
So that's just in the past week that we've been discussing, and that's a lot. Let's go back another week to an event you told us about, or we've talked about a few times in earlier interviews. There was a meeting in Berlin of opposition figures. So tell us about it, set it up for us, and then tell us your thoughts on the outcome.
Well, first of all, I think it was a very useful thing, because I think that it's one of the fundamental problems inside the Russian opposition, that it's not talking to each other. It was Mr. Kodakorski's initiative to get together in Berlin, because he had this great occasion. It's one of the most reputable human rights conferences, annual conferences that Kodakorski is sponsoring. He was saying, okay, so like, let's meet in the same days when everybody is already in town. It was 120, 130 people, so it was pretty large, which was funny. I was invited to the conference, but then a lot of people from these human rights circles of Russia started complaining that they don't want to sit in one room with an extremist who is conducting struggle inside Russia. that all the true guys, they do peaceful protests, go to immigration and whatever, which was very funny. and
and by the way, you've met this resistance before amongst.
Yeah, I met this
positions.
resistance before, but that was the first time when it was so bold and visible in public.
Yeah.
And the whole conference, because of this, turned into the debate on whether this violent protest is acceptable or not. And which is good. When we started the conference, also it was a sociological poll which indicated that just 1/3 of people were in favor of the armed resistance. And when the conference ended, 2/3 were in favor of armed resistance. And in the result, the delegation of the Congress of People's Deputy was the largest. Approximately 20 members of the Congress took part in this conference out of 120, 130, as I mentioned. And we made an initiative to make a joint declaration, which was not planned and anticipated by the organizers of the conference. And we drafted this declaration, and this declaration was supported. And by now, it's signed by more than 20,000 people. So people started just signing it on the internet, so not just people who went for this conference. And it was a great success to my mind, because this declaration actually emphasized positions, ideological positions, which were also, I would say, not a consensus point before. One of them is that we shouldn't just stop the war, but that we should deoccupy all the territories captured by Russia, not only in Ukraine, but also in other countries like in Georgia, Moldova, and others. And that all those countries should receive a fair compensation, and that all the atrocities should be investigated, and all the war criminals should be put to justice. Again, anti-war thing was a consensus before. All the rest were subjects of great debates, and now it's the dominant position inside the Russian opposition. Secondly, we agreed that we shouldn't just replace Putin, but that we should dismantle the system. And also, it was not a consensus before. The consensus was only about Putin. Thirdly, there was stipulated that Russian regions and other countries should be treated equally, and the imperial policies against them should be stopped once and for all. Also, this equal sign between the other countries and the Russian regions is something totally new. Fourthly, it was said that Russian political prisoners and Ukrainian POWs should be treated equally, and they should be freed simultaneously, and that they represent one thing, one story, that it's not two separate things. And lastly, but not leastly, it was said that in Russia there are way more opposition-minded people than abroad, and that they are heroes, and that they should be supported, and they should be admired, and their fight should be supported. And that's also something very new, because many Russian emigres, they were saying, all the real people left, nobody left in Russia, these all wrong people, so forget about them. So these 5 topics, these 5 items, to my mind, are extremely important, and I'm really glad that we got so many people to sign under them.
A couple of questions for you. Is that last point in some way supportive of the partisans that we were talking about earlier?
Well, you know, from one side, in this declaration, everybody avoided the discussion of methods.
Yes.
Because there is no consensus there, and there was a great debate, and people were not ready to agree. And whether we, in case we put there something about the armed resistance, I would guarantee it would collapse and it would not be signed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that firstly, the equal sign between Russian political prisoners and Ukrainian POWs, it's already an admittance of the fact that there is war, and that Russian political prisoners, Russian political movement is a part of this war.
Yes.
And as you correctly say, that the priority on supporting the resistance inside Russia also speaks in that direction.
Was I'm not sure I'm saying this properly, but was the Navalny organization or his supporters, were they there as well?
No, they ignored it. Navalny guys never get into any of the joint activities. They never signed any collective papers. They want to stay totally separate on everything. Actually, it would be another test for them, because in the beginning of June, there would be another major convention of the Russian opposition, which would happen inside European Parliament, and this time it's organized by European politicians, European Commission and European Parliament. And again, there is the same great debate whether to invite us or not. And,
To invite you.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So the guys who were fighting against us during Berlin conference, they want to take their revenge. So it's still in the dispute. But at the same time, Navalny people would be present there, so we don't know whether they agree on something together with others or not, but at least they would be present, which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, to bring this back to the beginning of our discussion of this event in Berlin, if I understand this, and I think you may have said this, it really was the person who made this all happen was Mr. Kodakorski, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you had said back in March, I'm going to read you something you said on Twitter. You said, I suggest Congress of People's Deputies appoint Mr. Kodakorski as head of transitional government for time of overcoming crisis. Is that, did this meeting or in general, is that now part of the discussion? His involvement in that way?
No, it is not. First of all, the political competition still exists. Secondly, everybody wants to be involved in the appointment process. So they want Kodakorski or whoever would be appointed to owe them and not the Congress, which is pretty obvious, and that's why I hear certain calls from just the general public that guys start thinking about this transitional government, stuff like this, but I don't see whether people are ready for this or not, and I think they are not yet. I think that right now, in general, the Russian opposition is not ready, and probably it's not needed to form a certain, even a coalition, not even one organization, not even a coalition. I think it's a bit too much, and we need coordination. We need to agree not to fight each other. But I think that we need many structures, and I think that it has to be a political pluralism, because there are some people who are to the left, some people to the right, some people who are conservative, some people who are liberal, the way Congress is created.
Yes.
So it has to be a variety of people, and that's why coalition, I cannot envision it, but the mechanism under which such a transitional government could be formed, I think that's a necessity, and that's what the Congress would be proposing.
Well, and so I promised at the beginning of this discussion that, we would get an update from you about the Congress itself. I know that you just announced the next meeting of the general group is in June. What do you want to tell us about what's been happening there? The bigger accomplishments of the Congress since we've last spoken.
The Congress didn't convene between our discussions. So the previous one was in February, and the next one would be in June. But the working groups were actively preparing the legal acts that would be discussed during the Congress. And we have a significant progress on the Municipal Reform Act. So self-governing, probably it would be called something like this, self-governing act. Also there is a strong progress on the transitional constitution. I think that we'll be ready to pass 2 more chapters of the transitional constitution, which is very good. And also there is a variety of other documents, including document on the political prisoners in general, on the criminal amnesty that the Congress is about to discuss on the next meeting.
So it's a very consequential meeting, obviously bringing all the work of the work groups together. Meeting again in Warsaw?
Yes. We want to host this time a large delegation of the Polish government. They had an idea to come with both executive and legislative branch to come to the Congress to solve the to show the token of recognition of what we are doing there. We want to have a joint session with them discussing the past relationship between Russia, so Soviet Union, and Poland, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and Katyn and Smolensk disaster. So there were certain very sensitive issues which we want to get discussed, and so that we both understand that we are standing on the same page and that we can proceed in a very friendly and open manner between the 2 countries.
Excellent. I want to ask you one last question, and that is something I've been dying to ask you for a long time. I always admire your lapel pin. I always admired the flag behind you. How can we who are yes, that flag, lots of people have Ukrainian flags now. How can we get these flags which represent a new democratic Russia? Or lapel pin?
To get the flag, I mean, in the US?
Yes.
That's no problem. We can deliver.
Well, I guess I want to encourage you, or maybe this is a project I can take on behalf of the Congress. I would love to see people wearing lapel pins like yours and flying flags like the one behind you. I think it would be great for Americans to show their support.
Look, it would be fantastic, and actually we were thinking for quite some time about certain merchandise of the Legion of Free Russia, of the Russian partisans, of the Congress, so on something that associates with the struggle that's going on, and that the people who can purchase it can donate by doing so to the cause. And I think that if somebody would help us with this, because we just don't have enough hands for this. And also, when we were discussing it, we were always saying that, okay, so if we do it in Ukraine, in the war situation, the deliveries are a pain in the ass. Sorry for my English. And if we do it from the outside, like from the US, I think that would work way better.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm taking it on. I'm looking for someone who has some experience in this merchandising area, but let's just say consider it done. Let's find a way to create some merch, as we say here in the US. And let's wrap it up with that. We've had a great long conversation.
So
I
it's a
hope it
great
won't be
idea.
so long before we do it again.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm sorry. It was my fault that we had such a long pause, and I promise it would not happen again.
Well, I look forward to talking with you again next week, Ilya. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and talk to you next week. Yes.